Hello, and welcome to the Iron Maiden. My name is Abby, and today I'm going to show you the Vynnset card review. So this is my opinion of all the Vynnset cards that I consider to be playable or worth talking about. I will not be talking about cards like, for example, Command and Conquer. Command and Conquer is not really functional in Vynnset the same way it's functional in other heroes. And if you were playing that card, you really would be best finding someone else to play it in. These will be cards that Vynnset is either the best at using, even if that's still pretty bad, or that she has an interesting interaction with. If I've missed any cards that you think fit this criteria, leave a comment below, or better yet, join the Discord down in the description below, and you'll be able to vote on the next video. That's how this one was chosen, by a vote in the Discord. And you'll be able to tell me your thoughts on any cards that you disagree with or any cards that I missed. So I don't want this video to be forever, so we might as well get started. Here are the tiers I've split cards into. Universal tier is, of course, for cards that see play in every single Vynnset deck, or at least every single competitive deck, or almost every single deck. Role filler cards are the cards that bulk out the deck. Cards that could be power crept, but are not bad. So this is going to be a lot of the cards in a deck, and not all of them can be universally powerful cards. Then we've got meta dependent. That's for cards that sometimes very good and sometimes very bad. A lot of those cards are going to be sideboard options. Then we've got budget options. This is for cards that might be significantly worse than, say, a legendary equipment, but they are 100th of the price of that piece of equipment. So I've put that in there because I know I've got budget players who watch these videos, and I've been a budget player my entire Flesh and Blood career. And at the bottom, maybe playable. This is for cards that I don't really think are good right now. Cards that you could either make an interesting build to make functional, or that would require new cards to be printed in order to possibly be functional. Alright, let's start with equipment. In the head zone, we've got a lot of options here. The universal tier, I've put Face Purgatory. I think Face Purgatory is by far the best head equipment that Vynnset has access to over a wide metagame. It's fairly easy to trigger. Almost every hand has a non-attack and an attack. And then the trouble is just, if you block with those cards, how do you still function? But the discard, the draw, the block value, I think Face Purgatory is universal. Then Ebonfold in the role filler. I've put this here because it goes in just about every Vynnset deck, and that's because of the Spell Void 2. It has a powerful ability to shut down Kano's combos, and it's also very good against Cecilio. It also has an interesting ability to put cards in banish and draw, which is also pretty interesting. Definitely a good budget aggressive option. So I thought it was better than meta dependent, because it sees play almost always, because there's almost always a deck that's going to do arcane shenanigans. Then, in meta dependent, I've got Balance of Justice. This is one of the best headpieces in the game, as long as your opponent is doing unfair card draw. So it's better than Face Purgatory in the sense that you still get the 2 block, but you don't have to do any sort of hoops to get the extra card. But it does have the downside that it can't make your opponent discard a card. Then we have Bandana of the Blue Beyond. This is a new one. This card lets you play Nazareth, play Oblivion twice in a game. How good is that? I haven't tested it. I've heard from some people, some other content creators, that this is possibly worth doing. It's also 1 cent or 5 cents. It's a bulk common that no one else is really playing. So definitely a card to keep an eye on. And if the meta gets very, very slow for example, after Mastery Pack Guardian, then that's probably worth looking at. Crown of Dichotomy I've got there next. This is similar to the bandana in the sense that it fills a kind of niche role, except this niche role is Verdant's exactly. This is a Arcane Barrier piece so that you can run Reaping Blade and still get to Arcane Barrier 3 between your chest, or 4 if you count the Quill Hand, which you will inevitably break. And then it also has the ability to set up a turn next turn by putting an attack and non-attack back on top of your deck. Is it very good? It's okay. I've tried it a little bit. The ability rarely comes up, but the Arcane Barrier is nice. Most people have since switched off Reaping Blade onto Flail, but if Verdance ever becomes a deck that wants to gain life in a more significant way than she's doing right now, or if there's another hero that will want to gain life, it's a good option to bring Reaping Blade in and use Crown of Dichotomy. Then Crown of Providence. This is a very solid headpiece that will filter your arsenal out. This is very powerful, obviously, when there's people coming after your arsenal. This is a good piece when there is assassins and when there's maybe guardians playing Command and Conquer with their pummels. Could be a very good option. Although Face Purgatory is also good in those ways because it can get around, for example, the pummel. Crown's still very, very good, and it will have a place again in this deck. Then I've got Arcanite Skullcap in the budget options. It blocks up to 3 as long as you're lower life when you do some of that blocking, and has Arcane Barrier 3. So this is a pretty good budget option, although I understand it's not very budget. It's a little bit more budget than some of the other ones. And it's probably pretty good into Kano. Having AB3 in your helmet means that you don't have to, for example, play the chest, the Dyadic Carapace. So you could also play something else in that slot. Even more budget, but a similar option is Blade Beckoner Helm. All these Blade Beckoners are quite good. They generally give you 2 block, either at once or separate. There's only a few decks that don't have real weapons. So it's a really good option for how cheap it is. Then Bunkerbeard. This feels a budget alternative to Crown of Providence, and that is using your arsenal when it would be destroyed. So the good thing about Bunkerbeard is it lets you use the Rune Gate cards that you put in Arsenal. So this is a good budget alternative. For example, if your opponent is playing Codex, they force a card into your arsenal, this can get it back out. Or if you just happen to be arsenaling a card that's bad, which isn't that uncommon in Vynnset, then you have that option. The last 2 ones are Face Adversary, which is kind of a balance of justice, in the sense that it blocks 2 if your opponent has drawn a card. You don't get a card, but it's kind of in the same vein. And Hope Merchant's Hood, which can get you a new hand, basically. So Hope Merchant being an instant means it's pretty good because you can activate it in your opponent's turn. Other effects like this you can't activate before you have to banish to Vynnset. But Hope's Merchant might be the best option for a hyper-aggressive deck that doesn't care about blocking and is on a budget. Then in the last tier, the maybe playables, Amethyst Tiara is interesting in the sense that it can save you from a Kano combo, but it does sacrifice all of your rune chance effectively, and then what are you going to do next turn? You're not going to kill them next turn, so you're just giving them more space. It's not great for right now. And Helm of the Arknight in the upcoming Viserai LL Precon deck. It just has Temper 2, so it gets 3 block. The guaranteed 3 block is pretty good if you have it, but I think most of these other options at Legendary are stronger than it. For example, Crown of Providence is probably better. Arcanite Skullcap may be better. Face Purgatory I think is definitely better. Alright, our chest pieces, a few less this time. So there's 2 big types of chests in Vynnset. There are the ones that make resources and the ones that block really well. In Universal, we have both types. Tunic is, of course, a mainstay in Vynnset. Lets you play some of those one-cost cards and not have to waste an entire extra card. And it also lets you activate creepers without pitching a card. So by far the best equipment into decks that you have to kill. Dyadic Carapace is instead better into decks that you don't have to work very hard to kill, decks that can't really block. You get 3 block out of your chest piece, and you get some Arcane Barrier, very strong, and it's good to have it combined because it means that you get more sideboard slots because you don't have to put in a Null Rune chest or something for Kano. I've got nothing in Role Filler, although you might be able to argue some of those could go up depending on. In the meta dependent, I've got Arcanite Fortress. So of course this would have to be paired with Arcanite Skullcap. But if you have, for example, a Kano Uprising where Kano is everywhere, I could definitely see Fortress becoming a sideboard card, as it gives you AB3 in your head slot and then Spell Void 2 in your chest. So that's pretty good. Although I guess you could have AB2 in your chest and Spell Void 2 in your head with Ebb and Fold. So it's not much better. Carrion Husk is extremely powerful as a 6 block. The downside obviously being that you get blood depth for the rest of the game. So really Husk has to be played against decks that have giant attacks but also can't really block. It's not very good against Guardians. It is fairly good against Azalea, for example, but she is now LL'd. If we get another Ranger that doesn't play many blues, so Marlin, not good against, but if we get another Ranger that doesn't play many blues, that might be a good option. Then we have some budget options. Aether Ironweave blocks 1 and can make 2 resources under the right circumstances. Those circumstances mean that you're only really using those 2 resources to second Runegate from hand, but it's not bad. Bladebeck in the plating just gets 2 block, like I said before. Sometimes that's just really good. It's almost as good as Dyadic in, for example, against Syndra. And Old Knocker can make 1 resource and has Blade Break 1. We don't care about being tapped, doesn't do anything to us. So this is exactly Tunic once a game. Except that you can only block or make the resource is the big downside. It's pretty rare to use Tunic more than twice. So Old Knocker is a fairly good substitute, except for the fact that in Tunic's case, you always get 2 value out of it, the resource and the block. And Old Knocker, you can only get 1, either way. And then the maybe playables, Heart and Cross Strap makes 2 resources for an attack, basically. This means that you can Runegate from hand without jumping through the hoops that Aether Ironweave requires of you. But it doesn't block. It's okay. It's interesting. Bloodtorn Bodice. This one makes 1 resource and doesn't block. So you would think worse than Old Knocker, but it has this interesting thing where you have to destroy an aura, which sounds like a downside. But if, for example, you're playing a deck that has Arcane Cussing, you could use that to your advantage. Especially if they print new auras that like to be destroyed, like Cussing does. I could see Bloodtorn Bodice being a budget option, or even if there was lots of those types of auras, maybe a full-on role filler equipment. The last one I have is Quelling Robe. You could probably argue this is a budget option or a meta-dependent card. The Quell is very powerful into Syndra, and it's pretty good against Assassins as well. And other things like, for example, Acilio, it's probably okay against. The big problem is that while Quell is good, the equipment does nothing else. If they put Quell on better equipment, I think it would be a very good keyword. Arms. For the Universal tier, Vexing Quillhand. It's too good to not be basically all on its own. 2 Rune Chance is both 2 damage and 2 resources in Vynnset, which makes it 4 value out of nowhere. Sometimes it's more, depending on what you've got around set up. And it also has Arcane Barrier in the meantime. It's just a fantastic card. And the role filler, we've got nothing because most Vynnset decks don't play a second arm slot right now. But in meta dependent, I've got Grasp of the Arknight. So Grasp adds 3 block to your deck, which is obviously very good. The ability to make Rune Chants is fairly bad in Vynnset because it always starts at 3 cost, considering that you always make a Rune Chant at the start of turn. So because of that, it's fairly hard to get the appropriate amount of value out of a Grasp for making Rune Chants. But in a meta where your opponent doesn't want to block, for example, if every other deck in the game was Syndra, you could probably play Grasp the Arknight for the 3 block and for the ability to play 2 cost Rune Gates out of nowhere with just 2 cards in hand. Stonewall Gauntlet blocks 1 and then gives -1 to the whole chain. This is extremely good against some ninjas. That's about it. It did see play against, for example, Zen, when Zen was extremely powerful, but it would really have to be a only that type of deck meta in order for me to want to replace Quill Hand, probably. Bleedback and the Gauntlets, they block 2. That's fantastic. It's almost as good as Grasp, considering Grasp rarely makes Rune Chants in this deck. Goliath Gauntlet makes for +2. It's a pretty decent Quill Hand impression in the sense that it gets 2 damage out of nowhere. Problem is really that Vexing Quill Hand is already a budget card. It's less than $5 at most places. So really Goliath Gauntlet would have to be a budget option in the sense that it's cards that you can probably get for free from your local game store. Then in the maybe pile, Braces of Belief can make up to 2 damage. The interesting thing it does is look at the top card of your deck. So this is important because there are a few cards from Arcane Rising that care about the top of your deck. Is that going to be an archetype going forward? I really doubt it. If they do print new cards for it, I think it could potentially be a budget option. Fisticuffs is a card that I've looked at fairly often. It just pays 2 to +1 out of nowhere as a reaction. So this is pretty interesting when you're playing Morph Skies, because your opponent will block naturally with their 2 cards up to 6 block usually, and then they have to look at that Fisticuffs and think, are they going to crack that? And really that's the value of it, is making your opponent second guess their blocks, maybe waste some armor. Is it good? I really, really doubt it, but it's there. Beam Brace's Determination gets around prevention. We already kind of do that, but if there was a deck like Enigma that was really popular again, you could maybe play it. I kind of doubt it. And Swift Strike Braces. This is in here for the potential Nimbleism Vynnset deck list. If you want to go back to playing Chain, you can play all of the little Blood Debt attacks and Nimbleisms and things like that. Could be an interesting budget option. I don't think it's very good though. In our leg slot, in the Universal tier, we have Spellbound Creepers. It makes action points. It blocks 1. It allows you to do all sorts of tricks. It is too good, really. So we're not really competing with it. We're just trying to replace it in matchups where it doesn't do anything. So Dance of Darkness, for example, very good against Kano. Some people have been playing it. I don't usually play it, but if Kano was a big threat, you could definitely put it in. Meta dependent, Quick Dodge Flexes. This is extremely good against decks like Syndra, or even decks like Slippy. Those types of decks that don't really block very much, so you don't need creepers, but also have a lot of reactions and small attacks. quick dodge good against them. Blade Beckoner Boots gets 2 block. It's better than Creepers in matchups where you weren't going to activate it. That's something. Sutcliffe Suede Hides can make go again as long as you've played an attack and a non-attack. This is a pretty interesting budget option. Kind of does what Creepers does in the sense that you pay 1 and get an action point as long as you've played an attack and a non-attack. The difference is obviously Creepers is more repeatable. You can hide what you're doing better with it, and it blocks 1. So still a budget option, but it does a pretty good impression. Time Skippers, pay 3, make a second action point, so you kind of get go again on anything. Could see this being useful as when you have 2 Rune Gates and some Malefics, you turn a blue into go again whenever you want. Something. Then we've got Mage Master Boots and Quartermaster Boots, each of which can give go again to a non-attack. This could be useful in the Eloquence style Vynnset build, the Binstant build, that wants to give go again to these non-attacks that don't have it. The difference is Mage Master costs 1 and Quartermaster costs 2, but Quartermaster can block. It can't do both, so it's more flexible but less powerful, is the way to think about it. Quick Clicks for the Nimbleism build, probably not good, but if you want to, pretend to be Chain, it's there. And Snapdragon for similar reasons. Could also see this doing something alongside some cards I'm going to bring up later. There's that 1 for 4 that can make Rune Chants based on how many non-attacks you've played. I think that could be an interesting Snapdragon target, but Creepers is too good, really, to have this competition. And then the weapons. In the Universal tier, we have the one that says Vynnset on it, so that makes sense. Flail of Agony. Paying 1 life to attack for 1 is a neutral trade. If your opponent takes the 1 and you get a Rune Chant, you get -1 damage, but you get 2 damage in return. More importantly, the Rune Chant is unlocking Rune Gates, so you're kind of getting like 1 life for up to 3/4 value out of your weapon, which is okay. And if they block it, then that's okay as well, because they're getting an armor or a card or whatever. But the most important thing it does is pays life. Means that you can trigger your Rune Gate cards on yourself very, very easily. Grimoire of the Haunt is in Role Filler. This is in just about every Vynnset deck, because you might as well play it. It has Arcane Barrier, and then sometimes the Eloquence ability comes up. But if we had a stronger offhand, or even a second one-handed weapon, like Scepter of Pain used to be, I could see Grimoire coming out of decks or being relegated to sideboards. Then we have the meta dependence. Reaping Blade is obviously very good when your opponent wants to gain life. You have to have your opponent dedicated to gaining life in order for this to really pay off, but it's okay. It's also the most efficient weapon as far as Rune Blade's currently awful weapon choices. I mean, look at the 3 weapons we have on this board that don't say Vynnset on them. Those are some bad numbers. Bloodied Oval is 1 extra block. This is pretty good against things like Syndra. The reason it's meta dependent is because it won't always be good, and it does eat a sideboard slot, so it's kind of rough. It's okay. Budget options. Arcane Lantern replaces the most important text of Grimoire. Doesn't get you the interesting part, unfortunately. Grimoire's not very expensive anyway, but Arcane Lantern's even less so. Then in the weird maybe pile, Annals of Sutcliffe is a card that I've tried out. It's really, really difficult to make it do anything. When you just pitch 1 attack, for example, and you just draw a card, you're pretty often drawing a Rune Gate, which you don't really want in your arsenal, so that's not very good. When you pitch both, you get a Rune Chant and you draw a card. You're wasting 2 cards to get 1 rune chant and 1 random card. If it had Go Again, maybe. If it was one-handed, definitely. As it is, I don't think so. Dread Scythe, it can pay 3 to do 4 damage, 3 and 1 arcane, prevents life gain. It's interesting. It's probably worse than Reaping Blade due to the fact that Vynnset finds it hard to get those 3 resources. You can play Pitch Vynnset, which I've talked about a little bit, where the deck that plays a lot of blues and tries to actually pay for things. Is that deck very good? Not right now. And finally, Ornate Tessin. This can turn 2 cards you don't like into a random card off the top of your deck, which is actually not that bad if you squint at it. If you have Tunic, it can turn 1 card you don't like into 1 card off the top of your deck, which is a much more appealing option. It's also an instant, so we can do this in response to an attack or whatever. It's definitely worth considering, but it's not really worth the sideboard slot, I think. It's interesting, it's there. It's there. Next, we have attacks. First, we'll talk about the Rune Gate attacks. There's not many of these. Eloquent Eulogy, 1 for 4. Well, realistically, it's a 1 card 5 all by itself. Makes Eloquence. Very powerful, even if you don't care about the Eloquence. All colors of Deathly Whale can probably go in Universal. Maybe you'd argue that the blues go into Role Filler. It really does hold the deck together. If we got more Deathly Whale cards that had a different name, this deck could become a real monster really quickly. And I put Widespread Destruction up in Universal as well. Being 3 cost means it's fairly easy to play, while having the only Arsenal disruption that Vynnset can realistically play. The other widespreads either don't have a very good disruptive ability or are very expensive. So I think this is a good middle ground. Then Phantom Wraith, vanilla 2 for 6 is still pretty good in this deck. Deathly Delight is also a 2 for 6, except that it gets some of its value defensively by gaining a life instead. It's pretty interesting. Widespread Ruin is a 2 for 6 with text. Sometimes that text is relevant. Sometimes it's a downside against Earth Heroes, but it is still better than Phantom Wraith in most sense. And Annihilation, very powerful, but pretty clunky. Probably really good in the pitch deck. Kind of maybe one of the reasons to play the pitch deck is to have access to all these powerful blues. Then in meta dependent, I've put Phantom Banshee. This is a card that I've been playing recently because of Gravy. It's also pretty good against Prism, of course. Not that you need help with that matchup. I think it's better than, for example, dipping into yellow Phantom Wraiths or into some other colors of these cards. I think red Banshee is probably better. And then in the maybe playable is Rift Skitter. This card is severely underrated, but it does have native Go Again, which is extremely powerful. Getting free Go Again is good. Losing 3 points of value for it doesn't seem like a fair trade to me, but it's there. Other blooded attacks for when you want to cosplay Chain. In the Universal tier, I've got nothing, because most people aren't playing these. In the Role Filler, Banding Demagon is actually pretty good. It has seen play in Vynnset before Rosetta mostly. As a 0 for 4, it's one of the best cards to send after any given Rune Gates that has Go Again. For example, if you play Shadow Puppetry and give it Go Again. It's pretty good. The problem is that we've been inundated with these rune chant making things like Malefic. So it's pretty easy to set up double Rune Gates. So we don't really need Demagon when we can just double Rune Gate instead. In meta dependent, put Shadow of Ursa. This is a card that you could consider playing into Gravy as another blood debt that kind of has natural go again. It also fuels your banish zone, so you could also consider this an anti-fatigue card. The big problem would be, obviously, if it's the only attack in your hand, it's very weak. It doesn't have go again in that case, and it doesn't have the damage numbers that Vynnset needs. And then Hungering Demagon, which you probably can't read, it's very small, but basically you can play it from your banish zone as long as your opponent has a card in soul, and when it hits them, it banishes the card out of their soul. So obviously, if Bolton and Prism become big meta threats, you could look at this. I don't think either of those matchups need particular help from a card like this, but if there was new light heroes, for example, that cared about their soul more, or in a different way, it's there. And then maybe playable, we have all the other Blood Debt attacks from Chains era. Ghostly Visit and Void Wraith, you can just play them. You don't have to jump through any hoops. They're both okay. They're both block 3, which is nice, but they're also not Rune Blade cards, which means that it's very difficult for Vynnset to give them go again. Then we have Piercing, Shadow of Eyes, Rip Through Reality, each of which require you to have dealt arcane damage to get the maximum value. So you can always play them, but they're very underrated. And then if your opponent has taken arcane damage, they get some sort of benefit. This is fairly interesting in Vynnset, who can guarantee that arcane damage, but having to pay for for example, 2 for 6 that requires hoops jumped through is just worse than not having to pay for a 2 for 6, where the only hoop is having enough rune chance. And then Unhallowed Rites, a 1 for 4 that tucks a non-attack with Blood Debt down to the bottom of your deck. Could see this one seeing play as a sort of Bounding Demagon replacement, where you attack after a go again with this, and then you put something like a Cull or a Requiem for the Damned on the bottom to try and power out more action points at the end of the game. It's interesting. Other non-Blood Debt attacks. Once again, nothing universal here, but in Role Filler, Ravenous Rabble, this is a classic red line card. As a 0 for 4 go again in the decks that only play red cards, it's fairly good. Deny Redemption stops life gain if you discard it at the right time. Kind of awkward, the sense that you have to have it in hand. It's a 0 for 4 under the right circumstances. And most importantly, for non-Vynnset heroes, it makes unpreventable arcane damage. Now, Vynnset already gets that, so it doesn't really matter to her, but the life gain thing could matter for her. Swarming Gloomveil and Rune Rager Swarm are basically the same in the sense that they always are 0 for 3 go-agains, because you are always making a rune chant, and Gloomveil has a lot of other text that can also make it a little bit more powerful. The issue with these cards really is that if you play them first, you lose that rune chant, so rune gating is harder, but it's probably something worth considering against Gravy or other ally-based decks. It's also probably some of the cards that see the most play in Redline Vynnset decks. Last in the meta-dependent is the Runic Reclamation. It's a 7 power, so it's a good popper, and it can destroy auras when it hits the player, and then you get a rune chant. So this is pretty good at killing, for example, Spectra auras or other auras that you're not allowed to target. It has to hit the hero, but if they block out, that's also kind of good. It's a pretty interesting card, other than the fact that you have to pay for it. Spellblade Assault. 2 for 4, make 2 rune chants. If you give this go again, you can play this into a Rune Gate very easily. This is a card that Rune Gate Chain sometimes plays. It's probably at its best in blue as a setup card, but I'm not really sure it's good anywhere. And in the maybe playables, Nimby for the Nimbleism Vynnset deck list that no one's going to play, but I felt I should talk about it because the Nimby package is genuinely very strong. I just don't think that Vynnset's the right hero for those cards. Douse in Runeblood is that card I talked about earlier. I could imagine a Vynnset deck list that plays, for example, the Binstance, maybe something like Seeds of Agony, and just tries to set up a big Douse and Runeblood turn where you can make 4 or 5 rune chants and then play a rune gate and do some other shenanigans. Mostly it's just because I think the card's really cool. Ninth Blood, or Ninth Blade, this is the best stacking finisher. Just like old Viserai tech, if you want to play a deck where you just make rune chants and pass, Ninth Blade is probably your win con. Is that deck good? No, I've tried it. It's really bad, but it is the best card for that option, I think. Dread Triptych is a very powerful blue. If you can get Go Again and have another blue in hand, you can also swing Triptych and usually end the turn with at least 2, sometimes 3 rune chants. That's really, really good. The problem is, of course, getting the action points and that you have to fill your deck with blues. Hit the High Notes is always a 1 for 6 in Vynnset. That's something. It's not great in the sense that you kind of have to get Go Again on a rune gate to kind of make full value out of it, but it does have a good number. And Standing Order. This is here because it's a 5 block that puts your arsenal on the bottom. Vynnset has, like I said before, a lot of bad arsenals. So having a card like this lets you confidently arsenal a bad card, knowing that you will eventually get to bottom it out of your deck, or back into the bottom of your deck. I have wished for a long time that they would print a defense reaction that would do this, that would sink below, but it would sink your arsenal instead. But until they have, Standing Order is that card. And the final section, although this is a long section, non-attacks and non-attacks. First, cards that make rune chants. Universal cards. Deadwood Dirge makes 3 rune chants out of nowhere. You usually are sacrificing the one you made from turn to make 3. Very powerful. Also the best way to double rune gate in lots of situations. One of the best cards to use creepers on. All around fantastic. Malefic Red. I have got some other colors on here on this particular page. Malefic Red is one of the best cards for consistency. If you're sending 1 rune gate every turn, it halfway guarantees that you get to send next turn's rune gate. If you have 2 of them on board, you can usually get a double rune gate for basically no price. One of the best ways to beat fatigue and aggro, so that's why it's in the universal tier. Jack-o'-lantern, role filler card in the Redline deck. Although I have not seen many of those deck lists recently, and I haven't seen Jack-o'-lantern in the few I have, I do believe this card has a place because it can draw a card and make a rune chant, and it's also a shadow non-attack. If it does those things, it's very, very good. Problem being, you really have to fill your deck with reds, and you also have to have a very high blood deck count. Speaking of red blood deck cards, Funeral Moon. This is one of my favorite cards. This might be my favorite Vynnset card because of the high flexibility, although it does have low power. It's a role filler in the sense that you're never thrilled having it in your deck, but it will do a little of everything. Revel in Runeblood is one of the anti-fatigue options that people play. It's the one that I most commonly play. When you use it off of creepers or just out of a Go Again, you get a massive spike in damage. It can put you ahead and it can win you the game if you draw it at the right time. Malefic Yellow is going in the role filler tier. Probably would like to replace Malefic Yellow, but for now, It's much better than a lot of these other options. Read the Runes, meta dependent, makes 3 rune chance, does not have Go Again. If we get more Eloquence cards, yeah, Read the Runes could get better, but generally I think it's only worth playing in very slow metas where you need to set up. It's a pretty good setup card. In the same way, Blessing of the Occult does almost the same thing, except it costs 1. So that is obviously worse. The benefit this card gets is you can find it from Sonata Galaxia, which is a massive benefit because that card often has Go Again. So, pretty good card. Kind of they're occupying the same role. Really, it just depends if you have Sonata or not. Envelop in Darkness. This is a card that I'm putting in meta dependent because when you want shadow non-attacks, it's a pretty good shadow non-attack. For example, when Enigma was legal, it was pretty good into Enigma. It's not a fantastic card by numbers, however, so you wouldn't play it in most circumstances. Then we have Arcane Cussing. Like I said before, when you can destroy it of your own accord, such as with Dirge or Bodice, it just makes 3 rune chance. The big benefit of this card is that you can go get it from Sonata Galaxia. When you do that, you obviously get the Go Again. It has Go Again anyway, so that would be fine. Then you can guarantee arcane damage to get through, to crack it, and then you get your double or triple rune gate very easily. It also could see play in the pitch Vynnset type of deck list where you play a lot of blues. Could see this and Envelop getting partnered up often. They do have powerful synergy. In the same way, Runeblood Incantation is sometimes worse Malefic. Sometimes it's better, but usually it's worse. Costing 1 is also a big downside, but you could replace it. You could replace Yellow Malefic with it, and that would make sense. But I think you would have to be playing in a meta that needs high consistency, because Malefic is really better at doing a double rune gate because it waits for you, whereas Runeblood does not wait. Budget options. Oath of the Arknight is the same as Envelop, except it costs 1 more but blocks 1 more. I think it's best at blue as a budget option for pitching decks. Still not good though. Yellow Deadwood Dirge, good for consistency, bad, really bad for numbers. It's just +1 in a real sense. Not great, but good for consistency. Sutcliffe Research Notes is one of those cards that looks at the top of your deck, and for every Runeblade attack action, you get a rune chant. So if you play that with some of the other cards that look at the top card or manipulate the top card, you could get 1 for 3 rune chants, or if you just really like gambling, 1 for 3 rune chants. It's possible. It's not good though. And Runeblood Barrier. This is a pretty interesting card that does create a lot of rune chants. It can be found off Sonata Galaxia, is its really big benefit, but it comes with the downside, really, that your rune chants basically get ward. They have to pop and prevent damage for you. If the card didn't have that text, it might actually be better, which is funny. Go Again cards. Shadow Puppetry is universal. It's a shadow card. It gives +1. It gives Go Again. It's already better than all the others, just with those couple lines of text. And then it gives the on hit to look at the top and banish it if you'd like, which sometimes draws a card. For role filler, Flying High could be an excellent role filler card for red line decks. It's most of the way to being Shadow Puppetry, as long as you're pretty much always playing a red card. Could see this even in normal Vynnset deck lists, because they play almost exclusively red attacks. Something to keep in mind. Machinations of Dominion, also a good role filler. It always gives go again in Vynnset. It gives overpower, which is more often useful than you might think. And of course, it's a block 3 and a blue. So that's a very flexible card for a go again card. In matchups where you don't need it, you just block with it. Matchups where you need it, it's there. Meta dependent, Morvary and Skies, extremely good against decks that have allies like Gravy, and also pretty good against decks that don't really want to block, like Syndra, for example, but is the worst go again when your opponent wants to block anyway. Tear Through the Portal is like Flying High. It gets the other half of Shadow Puppetry, basically. You get the shadow part and the go again, but it's restricted to reds. It's one of the best cards to chain Deathly Whales together, but there are certainly better options, I think. Really, you'd have to be in a very fatigue-heavy meta to want to play more than one tear. Diamond Amulet is the slightly better Time Snap Potion. This card, or Time Snap Potion, saw a bit of play in the pretty fatiguey meta before the High Seas was revealed or printed, because of its ability to be on board go again. Time Snap Potion down there is exactly the same in almost every situation, and it's probably much better bang for your buck. But if you have a Diamond Amulet, or you're willing to spend a few extra dollars for 1 in 100 games winning where you would have lost, it's there. Lead the Charge, especially the blue one, you get the benefits of having a blue, and it gives an action point instead of go again, which is sometimes notable. Other than that, it's about as good as like a blue Morvary and Skies. It's worse than blue Morv, but there's interesting applications. And Sweeping Shadows. This is a card that I had considered playing into New and other Assassins, because it can be played from Banish and it gives go again. It's a little bit restrictive, and it costs 3, I believe. It costs a lot. So not a fantastic card, but being able to be played from Banish makes it maybe playable. Buffs. Not many buffs here, and not many good ones, unfortunately. Beseech the Demagon is a excellent role filler card, in the sense that when you have spare sideboard slots, you can use it to kind of patch little holes in sideboard plans. It's a good hedge board card, because into decks that you just need to beat with consistency, it's always 3 damage, pretty much always. And into decks that kind of want to block out or play value with you, you can turn your hand into more damage as well as pay life. Runic Reckoning is very similar. You don't get the ability to pay life, but you do get an extra block. And other than that, they are pretty much identical. I guess Beseech doesn't work on cards from hand, and Runic does. So that's the small difference. Pummel, I've put in a budget option. I guess it's probably closer to meta dependent. It's a fantastic card if you draw it in the right hands. You'd have to be playing a blue heavy Vynnset deck list, and you'd have to be playing in a meta where you have a bit of space to keep these big hands. So, for example, if there's a bunch of Guardians next meta, but none of them are really attacking, they're mostly fatiguing, I could see Pummel coming back. Lunging Press is similar, but much more streamlined. Getting the +1 over lets you get Morv's guys to hit, making 3 rune chance. And if that happens, then your Lunging Press is worth 4 value, which is very, very good. In a lot of situations, it's best actually pitching it so that your opponent sees Lunging Press and worries about it for the whole game. Pummel's kind of got the same vibe where it's almost at its best when your opponent sees it and they don't know how many you're playing, so you can kind of keep them guessing. Then in the maybe playable, Come to Fight is a 1 for +3. It is worse than Runic Reckoning. Maybe it's a budget option. I don't know. Howl from Beyond is a 2 for +3, but it can be played from Banish, which is a big upside. This could be playable in a deck that wants more Shadow non-attacks. I have actually played this card before against Nu, because she's going to banish cards from the top of your deck, and Howl is a good way to just get more blood debt out quicker. Putrid Stirrings is very similar to Howl, except that it costs more and buffs by more. It's decent value for pitch. You spend, if you banish it and get a rune chant, then you spend 2 cards to make 6 damage, one of them being arcane. It does only work on rune gate attacks and only ones that you are rune gating from banish, but it's alright. Maybe it's best at blue though. And then Nimbleism for the Nimbleism Vynnset deck list that someone's going to have to put together and show me it's real, because I don't believe in it. Disruption. In the university, we have Cull. Excellent disruption. Can fuel double rune gates. Can mess with combos. Can banish. It's a good arsenal target. It's a Shadow Knight attack. Can make action points from Eloquence. Cull is probably the most flexible card in the whole deck. Succumb to Temptation is extremely powerful against decks that don't block. They take all the damage, and then they get their hand torn apart, and you get to choose which card, and it gives a spare action point. It's also a pretty good card against decks that you're not sure, because it still blocks 3 if you need to be blocking more, and if your opponent is blocking you out, you can still use it to get an action point, even if it won't do the hit thing. In Role Filler, I've got Imperial Seal of Command. This is a powerful anti-defense reaction tech that you can place on the board and then fire it off, and if you catch your opponent with with a few D-reacts in hand, then you get a lot of damage through. Big problem is you can't guarantee that they have D-reacts in hand before you pop it, so kind of gambling. Meta dependent, Chains of Mephetis. You've watched my videos recently, you know I love Chains of Mephetis. Very strong into decks that want to draw cards, but also want to pitch those cards. It's also really good against rangers because arrows can't be played from banish. Condemned to Slaughter. Pretty interesting new card from Rosetta. New in the sense that I haven't really talked about it. It lets you destroy an aura to destroy, or make them destroy an aura. This is pretty good against things like Spectra auras, but it could also be good against maybe Fang or other heroes that rely on banking tokens. It also notably can give any Runeblade attack +3, which means you can use Flail for 4, which I think is really funny. Probably pretty alright. I haven't tried it though. Talisman of Cremation. When you play a banish card, you can get a bunch of copies of a card out of your opponent's graveyard and banish them. This was previously good against Count Your Blessings. If we see a similar card that counts up cards from graveyard, this will be good again. Smashing Good Time can destroy items. It is, as far as I remember, the only item destruction that Vynnset has access to. This is a card that I've played against Max before, to little success. But when items are powerful, Smashing Good Time might be worth playing. Invert Existence, another recent powerhouse, messes with your opponent's graveyard, can do arcane damage, isn't instant, which is really, really good. You can even play it from Banish. It's good, very good card. In the maybe playable tier, we've got Diabolic Ultimatum. One of the worst cards ever printed, maybe. And as soon as it becomes good, it's going to be one of the best cards ever printed. And that's because there's no other card that really does this, or at least not one that Vynnset has access to. If you pitch an attack and a non-attack, your opponent must destroy an ally they control and a aura permanent, an aura they control. So if your opponent has one good ally and one good aura, it kills them both. Doesn't have go again, but Vynnset can get around that anyway. I think it's very bad right now, but for example, when the new Dromai gets printed one day, it could be very strong. Just don't know. It would require certain types of cards to be printed. Dimensional Vortex, one of the strangest cards printed in Dusk Till Dawn. For some reason, it can't pitch, even though it's already a fairly mediocre card. It costs 3. It costs 1 from Banish. If it costs 0 from Banish, I could see it. If it could pitch and block, I could see it. As is, it's very awkward. It's not even an instant. I guess they were just really afraid of this card. It is a non-attack that you can give go again with Eloquence, so there's that, I guess. Back to Reality can give +2 to an attack, and then if you do enough damage, you can destroy a non-token aura. Being non-token really damages this card. If it could destroy any aura, you could argue for its inclusion against other Rune Blades, or maybe Fang. But as is, you would really want powerful Spectra auras or other auras like that to be in play. And Midas Touch can kill an ally and sometimes gives your opponent some gold. If allies are really brutalizing the meta, it's there to help. Diabolic Ultimatum is kind of that card for Runeblade. Midas Touch is certainly a lot cheaper in the sense that you only have to pitch a single, or you can use a tunic for it. But it also gives your opponent some gold. So not really sure which one would be better. It would really depend on what type of allies are being printed. Defense. We're almost to the bottom of the list. This has been a long video. If you're still here, almost an hour in, well, you've clearly enjoyed this deep dive. Maybe leave a comment and tell me if I've left any cards out. So in the Universal tier, we've got Reduced to Rune Chant. This card's super good as a 5 value. If you count the resource you effectively get out of having another Rune Chant, it's kind of a 6 value card. Very good. Haunting Rendition, not as good in value. It either blocks 4 or prevents 2 and makes 1 Rune Chant. If it does make that Rune Chant, you're kind of getting the 1 damage and 1 resource thing. So it's pretty much always worth 4. The benefit is it's a bit more flexible. It doesn't require you to have a Rune Chant either. In the Role Filler tier, we have Sink Below and Shelter. These are 2 of the mainstay D-reacts of Flesh and Blood. Sink Below is good in Vynnset because it can help fix hands that don't have a way to make Rune Chants or don't have an attack or things like that. I think Haunting Rendition kind of power crept it out, but I could definitely see it coming back in a deck that has more non-attacks and is a little bit greedy with attacks and tries to filter towards them. Shelter from the Storm has the prevention text, which is pretty good against other arcane decks, other Vynnsets, for example, and really good against assassins and stuff. Haunting Rendition is, in my opinion, better at that problem, but if you wanted more haunting renditions, Shelter from the Storm is available. Meta dependent, Hold the Line is a 5-block D-react as long as your opponent has drawn 2 cards. So if your opponent is doing that unfair draw, it's very valuable, but if they're not, it's really bad. Sigil of Suffering is a 3-block reaction at base. It does an arcane damage, and if it does that damage, it gets +1. So it's either a 0 for 3 that takes something out of your opponent's hand, or a 0 for 5. One of those is obviously better than the other in most cases. You would have to have a meta in which people don't really block. So, for example, Syndra really never going to pitch to that. So, in that meta, where Syndra is the only deck, Sigil of Suffering, probably playable. That all you got is 3-block that draws a card as long as it blocks a 2 or less power attack. In a similar way, it's like Sigil of Suffering. It requires low to the ground aggro decks to get its value. It's really good against enemy Vynsets. If Vynnset gets really popular, you can use it to block Flail and draw a card. So that's worth considering. Arcane Compliance stops amping. So if Kano is running rampant, it's there to stop his giant combo turn. I think it's not as good as just having something like Spell Void Helmet or Oasis Respite, which we're going to talk about in a second, but it might be better against, for example, Acilio, who does some massive amps, and Oasis won't help against that. Calming Breeze is budget Shelter from the Storm. It's also kind of budget Haunting Rendition. The benefit being that you can Arsenal it, which you can't do with either of those cards, and still get the prevention part. So against a heavy Syndra and Assassin meta, could be an excellent budget option. Oasis, excellent budget option against Kano. If you're playing Tunic instead of Guided Carapace, then you can use this to prevent the Arcane from Wildfire and survive. If you have Dyadic Carapace, I'd recommend playing that instead of Oasis Respite, which is why it's in the budget section. And in the maybe playable section, Guardian of the Shadow Realm. It's a 2 for 6 reaction, which is notable. You can also buy it back from the Banish Zone. This is fairly bad in most situations. Like, you're keeping 2 cards, banishing Guardian, paying to get it back, and then arsenaling it. So you're like netting a rune chant, but also not really doing anything. It's pretty bad. Unmovable, probably better for its same job of a giant D-react. It blocks up to 8. So if Azalea with big dominates was back, or Guardians with big dominates come back, Unmovable will be there. Is it the best option against those decks? I don't really know. I think the 0 for 4 reactions will do just fine. Arcane Polarity is kind of your 0 for 4 against Arcane decks. It doesn't stop the Arcane, unfortunately, it just gains you life back. It's probably not that good in Vynnset specifically, but against, for example, an Acilio that plays lots of Arcane and very little attacks, could be good. Snag is very good against Assassin only. It stops attacks from getting bonuses from reactions. So it stops mostly Bonds of Agony. Other than that, it's fairly useless, but if you're seeing a lot of marionettes, it could be worth having 1 or 2. And finally, Grim Feast. This is a card that you can banish and play for 1, as long as it's coming from the Banish Zone. It gains 3 life. So it's kind of like one of those stacking cards that I talked about with the stack Vynnset deck earlier. Last one. Other cards. Cards that don't fit into the other categories. Oblivion. Universal. One of the best ways to beat fatigue decks is to make Nazareth. Even if you don't get to swing with it, they have to keep cards to kill it, which means they're taking damage. Usually, you get to swing with it, and then they kill it, so it's a 0 for 12. If you get to keep it for more than one turn, it is genuinely insane power level. Sonata Galaxia is becoming universal in my eyes. It's ups your consistency by going and getting Malefics. It can up your combo potential by getting some of the other auras. It can even up some disruption by getting, for example, Chains of Mephetis. It's really good. For role filler, I've got Mordred Tide. This is kind of a rune chant making card, but it doesn't do anything on its own. This is your alternative to Revel in Runeblood. So realistically, I'd be choosing one of those two in order to overcome fatigue decks. You probably wouldn't play both. I think they're both a little clunky, so you don't want to be playing that many of them. Rattlebones is kind of an attack action. It can banish an attack from your graveyard, and if you've done arcane damage, you also get to play it as an instant and get a free action point. The problem with the card would be that it costs 2, but if you can play a Shadow Known attack and then pay life and then attack your opponent, then you can pitch and play Rattlebones, put a second Rune Gate, or even the same one if you wanted, into Banish, and then Rune Gate it again. It's a pretty interesting card. Requiem for the Damned is another one of those weird cards that you play as anti-fatigue tech. Goes in the Vynnset deck, makes an Eloquence for action point manipulation. Meta dependent, Blood Tribute can get you an extra card in Banish. Could theoretically be okay against like fatigue decks where you just need to double Rune Gate more often. But I think it's really better at being in the red line decks, and the red line decks are pretty weak against fatigue. So I'm not sure what meta you would really want for Blood Tribute to be any good. Down and Dirty is a generic attack, but you can block from your arsenal using it. This is one of the best things to counter Codex of Frailty, because you can put it in there, block with it, goes back in the graveyard. Next Codex, put it in there, block with it. Other than just having a card in Arsenal, it's your best option. Eclipse Existence. If your opponent is always a light hero, this card is extremely good. If they are not a light hero, it does nothing. That's it. Poison the Well. Ever since the banning of Count Your Blessings, Poison the Well hasn't been seeing any play, but the second that another life gain based strategy comes up, it will be possibly played again. I think Vynnset is an okay home for these type of cards as well. She's happy to sit that in Arsenal. She doesn't use her Arsenal very often, and just sit there and wait for the right time to poison them. And then the big maybe playable tier. Dimensional Gateway is a lot like Blood Tribute, except that you pay 1 and it can do an arcane to your opponent. Is that any good? No, probably not. It's there for the potential of the whole look at the top of your deck Vynnset idea. Looming Doom is a very interesting card. It turns all of your rune chants into counters, and then each turn it does 2 arcane to your opponent. Notably, it does 2 arcane in a block, which means that if your opponent has 1 arcane barrier, which almost everyone will have into Vynnset, they can't prevent 1 of that damage. So if you have 40 rune chance and you play Looming Doom, your opponent will die in 40 turns. You can also do a very interesting trick where when you attack, in response to the triggers on the rune chants, you can play creepers, or you can activate creepers and play Looming Doom. It will eat the rune chants and get counters, but the rune chant triggers will still do arcane. Remembrance is a card that has potential. It can set up a very powerful endgame. You have to be almost out of cards for it to make a big difference. And that's pretty rare for Vynnset. I could see it in a very fatiguing meta where you just put all 3 red Malefics back into your deck. But other than that, very weak. Seeds of Agony for the chain cosplay version of Vynnset, or maybe for the Nonblood lady that makes rune chants for each non-attack you've played. Possible. Tome of Torment. Draws a card from Banish, doesn't have Go Again. In the Eloquence builds of Vynnset, this is possibly a very powerful card. 2 problems with it are, number 1, you have to get that Eloquence or the action point somewhere, otherwise it's pretty useless. Problem number 2 is that if you draw an attack, you can't then banish it, so it's pretty difficult to use that attack. Timing's a bit awkward, basically. Sigil of the Arknight helps you set up, but it is a big gamble because it only sometimes gets you an extra card. It also only does this after you've banished, so it's a little bit limited in what you can actually do with that card. Sonata Arcanix is a very interesting card that lets you, once again, gamble with the top of your deck and sometimes draw cards. The big problem is it always draws the attack actions and puts the non-attacks on the bottom. If it did the other way around, it'd be very, very good. But it's hard for Vynnset to use more than one attack action very easily. And finally, Vile Inquisition. This is free from Banish. It banishes the top card of someone's deck, and if it matches the color, they lose a life. This is the key card in the very bad stack Vynnset deck, where you just go Banish, make a rune chant, play this, get the top card of your opponent's deck. Sometimes they lose a life. Most importantly, you have not lost your rune chants, and you don't have blood debt. The deck's not very good, but in the future, cards could be printed that make that more viable. And that's it. Thank you for coming on this long review journey with me. If you made it all the way to the end, well, thank you so much. Join the Discord to hear more of my thoughts and more thoughts from other very good Vynnset players, and to vote on the next video. I like the voting idea. I'll probably keep it up for a while. Also got comics on the left and a Twitter account there you can see. I'm going to log off, so have a good day and be good.